Welcome back. So last time we looked at Eleanor's marriage to Louis VII, which ended in annulment in 1152. Just 8 weeks later, she marries Henry Plantagenet, Count of Anjou and Duke of Normandy, 10 years her junior and one of the most ambitious princes in Europe. Now, 8 weeks is far too short a time for first contact between the parties, full negotiation, securing the baronial support that will be needed, drafting agreements, arranging logistics, and then actually conducting the wedding. Unless, of course, a lot of groundwork has already been done before the annulment. And in this case, it has. Henry Plantagenet isn't a stranger. He's visited the French court before in 1151, the year before the annulment. That time, he's about 18 and one of the most powerful young princes in France. And the political logic is irresistible. Once the annulment becomes even a possibility, Henry becomes the most attractive candidate in Europe. He has a powerful territorial base in Anjou and Normandy, military talent, and aggressive ambition. For Eleanor, he's a partner capable of defending her lands and a more politically compatible personality than Louis. For Henry, the benefits were enormous. Aquitaine doubles his territorial reach, which makes him instantly the dominant prince in France and gains him vast resources. We have no surviving written proof of a pre-annulment contract, but it's foolish to believe that neither side considered this before the annulment was finalised. The speed of the remarriage implies readiness, so she knew at the time of the annulment that she had her next move all planned out. And this is worth slowing down a little to look at in a bit more detail, because I think it tells us something very interesting about Eleanor. As advantageous to both sides as it undoubtedly is, the marriage to Henry is risky. Henry is a powerful ruler, but Louis is Henry's feudal overlord for Normandy and Anjou. His most powerful vassal, marrying his former queen, is deeply humiliating for Louis, and Louis is understandably furious. Both Henry and Eleanor and all their advisors have got to be aware of that. They have to understand the risk they're taking. So I think what this tells us is that this is bold, aggressive strategy, not impulsive romance. So why would Eleanor take this risk, albeit a calculated one? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, her position in 1152 is dangerous. After the annulment, Eleanor is a 30-year-old duchess in sole control of one of the largest territories in France, without a powerful husband, and travelling back to Aquitaine. This isn't a secure position. She's very vulnerable. A wealthy, unmarried heiress in medieval Europe is a political target, and we know from the sources that on her journey south she narrowly avoids at least 2 attempted abductions by ambitious nobles hoping to force marriage and seize Aquitaine. So that tells us everything about the position she's in. Staying unmarried is dangerous. Secondly, Louis is still her feudal overlord too. Aquitaine is technically held from the French crown, and even after the annulment, Louis remains her suzerain, which means he can pressure her politically, he can interfere in her marriage negotiations, and he can even attempt to control Aquitaine indirectly. If she marries a weak noble, Louis can dominate both of them, but if she marries a strong rival prince, she alters the balance of power. So this isn't just a remarriage, it's strategic repositioning as much for her own safety as anything else. Why Henry? He's the only prince in France powerful enough to guarantee that Aquitaine would not quietly drift back into Capetian dominance. Aquitaine is notoriously difficult to govern. Its nobles are independent and rebellious. Eleanor alone would struggle to impose authority. Henry brings political muscle. Where Louis is pious, cautious, and temperamentally unsuited to Aquitanian aristocratic politics, Henry is aggressive, pragmatic, and comfortable with feudal warfare. From Eleanor's perspective, Henry is a much better political fit for ruling Aquitaine's turbulent nobility. So, marrying Henry is a risk, but not marrying is a bigger risk, and he's the best option available. Eleanor knows all this. She knows she's risking Louis's anger, but she knows Louis is dangerous either way, whether she's married or unmarried. She knows only Henry can offer the protection she needs. She knows that he's powerful, ambitious, and has a claim to the English throne. What she doesn't know is that 2 years into their marriage, Henry will become King of England and she will find herself queen again. Let's cross the channel and rewind 30 years to see how all that comes about. King Henry I of England has one legitimate son, William, who drowns in 1120. With no surviving legitimate sons, Henry makes the English barons swear to recognise his daughter, the Empress Matilda, who is married to Geoffrey of Anjou, as queen, an unprecedented and somewhat uneasy arrangement. When Henry I dies in 1135, Matilda is in Anjou, and England doesn't really want to be ruled by a woman married to a disliked Angevin. Enter Henry I's nephew, Stephen of Blois, who, in what is effectively a coup, crosses the channel, seizes the treasury at Winchester, secures church backing, especially from his brother Bishop Henry of Blois, and is crowned on 22nd of December 1135, all before Matilda could even respond. Stephen claims Henry I had named him heir on his deathbed, but no one really believes that. This means his authority rests on momentum, not law. Many of the barons who'd sworn an oath to support Matilda feel betrayed or politically exposed. As soon as resistance appears, any slight legitimacy Stephen might claim begins to crumble. His early reign sees disloyal English barons testing his weakness, Welsh uprisings, and a Scottish invasion under King David I supporting Matilda. In 1139, Matilda herself arrives in England, backed by Robert of Gloucester and with Scottish support. This transforms disputed succession into open warfare. From this point, England has two rival courts, two rival claimants, and barons who are increasingly acting independently of either court. Stephen's inability to control the barons leads to regional warlords, private armies, and widespread lawlessness. And this chaos lasts for 19 years. 19 years of stalemate. The barons are exhausted, the church wants stability, and the country is collapsing economically and socially. The turning point comes in 1153 when Matilda's son invades England. He doesn't have overwhelming military strength, but he does have growing baronial support and strong legitimacy as Henry I's grandson. And who, you might ask, is Matilda's son? Why, it's none other than Henry Plantagenet. I told you it was all a bit of a soap opera. The thing that swings it, though, is not a battle, but a death. The key obstacle to peace is Stephen's eldest son, Eustace. Stephen wants Eustace to succeed him, but the church refuses to crown Eustace while Stephen's still alive, a major humiliation, because they're afraid of perpetuating the civil war. In August 1153, about 7 months after Henry arrives in England, Eustace suddenly and rather conveniently dies during a meal, possibly from a seizure or acute illness, or poison. Nobody really knows. But his death removes the single biggest barrier to a negotiated settlement. Without Eustace, Stephen has no strong heir to fight for, and the barons no longer fear continuation of the conflict. Stephen himself becomes more open to negotiation, and the Treaty of Winchester is essentially a succession compromise. Stephen remains king for the rest of his life, Henry Plantagenet is named Stephen's heir, and Henry swears loyalty to Stephen until Stephen's death. The treaty holds, and England finally stabilises. 1 year later, Stephen dies, and Henry immediately succeeds without opposition. Henry's accession marks the beginning of the Plantagenet dynasty, which rules England for the next 300 years or so. Eleanor's first marriage made Aquitaine part of the French orbit. Her second marriage makes Aquitaine the foundation of what becomes the Angevin Empire, a cross-channel dominion stretching from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees. Through Eleanor's inheritance, Henry becomes the most powerful ruler in Western Europe, controlling more of France than even the French king. And in one final kick in the teeth for Louis, as if all this wasn't enough, within 2 years of marrying Henry, Eleanor gives birth to a son. In fact, Eleanor and Henry had 8 children, including Richard I, the Lionheart, and King John, more of whom later. So during the early years of Henry II's reign, Eleanor plays a visible political role. She travels extensively, issues charters, and acts as regent in England during Henry's absences. She also governs Aquitaine in her own name at intervals. But by the late 1160s, Eleanor is increasingly living in Aquitaine, while Henry operates from England and Normandy. Their political cooperation diminishes. Henry's centralised administrative reforms don't sit well with Aquitanian nobles, who are unused to northern discipline. Rebellions are frequent, and Henry increasingly governs Aquitaine directly, sidelining Eleanor. As a leader, Henry is brilliant but flawed. He's tireless and administratively innovative, but suspicious of delegation and determined to centralise authority. He has no interest in sharing power, which is a problem because, as I said just now, Henry and Eleanor have sons. Henry's problem is classic for medieval rulers. How do you satisfy ambitious sons without weakening the realm? He assigns them titles, arranges prestigious marriages, and promises future inheritances. He even crowns his eldest surviving son, Henry, as co-king in 1170, giving him a title, a court, prestige, but almost no actual authority or revenue. He refuses to give any of them independent governing power, divide territory, or give up any administrative control. He intends to retain effective power for life. This creates deep resentment, and things start to get tense between Eleanor and Henry. Henry is openly unfaithful, and medieval chroniclers suggest that his infidelities cause Eleanor personal resentment and humiliation. And for a queen of Eleanor's stature, public humiliation matters. While medieval kings commonly have mistresses, Eleanor wasn't a passive consort. The imbalance of respect likely deepens the rift, but the deeper issue is the political one. Henry's control over Aquitaine curtails Eleanor's autonomous authority. And things come to a head in 1173, when Henry proposes that castles in Aquitaine, effectively under Richard's future authority, should pass instead to Henry's youngest son, John. This alarms the older brothers, and together Henry the young king, Richard and Geoffrey rebel against their father. The revolt isn't merely a family quarrel, it's a coordinated uprising backed by Louis VII and other continental powers. The princes demand actual governance rather than just titular status. Eleanor attempts to leave Aquitaine to join her sons, clearly siding with them against Henry, but she's captured and Henry imprisons her. For the next 16 years, Eleanor remains under varying degrees of confinement in England. She's kept under close supervision at royal castles and residences, especially Old Sarum in Wiltshire, denied freedom of movement, and largely removed from political life. Henry forgives his sons. Perhaps he can understand the ambition that had driven them to rebel. But he doesn't forgive Eleanor because she remains dangerous. As Duchess of Aquitaine and mother of the Angevin heirs, she's too powerful to leave free. So she's politically neutralized. This long captivity is one of the starkest reminders of medieval patriarchy. Even the Duchess of Aquitaine and Queen of England could be restrained by royal authority. Now, we have no letters, no diaries, no reports from this time of her life to give us any insight into her state of mind. But for a woman used to being politically involved, being sidelined in this way must have been difficult. Imagine, you've lived through 2 marriages, 10 pregnancies, a crusade, marriage and an annulment from the King of France, becoming Queen of England, decades of political life, repeated warfare within your own family, and now to be so thoroughly neutralised. It must have felt like Henry was stealing the final active chapter from her life. But while we can't say how she felt about all this, what we can say with a reasonable degree of certainty is that captivity didn't break her. When Henry dies in 1189, Richard immediately orders his mother's release, and at around 67 years old, Eleanor immediately returns to active political life with remarkable energy. Henry had tried to end her political life at 50, but she still has another 15 years of active political power left after he dies. When Richard departs on the Third Crusade, Eleanor acts as regent of England. And when Richard is captured and handed over to Emperor Henry VI, she organises the enormous ransom required to free him. Her ability to maintain political cohesion during this crisis is extraordinary. After Richard's death in 1199, her youngest son John becomes king. And though ageing, Eleanor continues diplomatic missions. At nearly 80, she once again becomes the key to Aquitaine. Her support helps John claim the Plantagenet lands in France against a rival claim. Eventually, though, she retires to Fontevraud Abbey in Anjou and dies there in 1204, around the age of 82. She was buried at Fontevraud beside Henry and Richard, but her tomb doesn't present her as Henry's wife or Richard's mother. While Henry's effigy proclaims kingship and Richard's evokes warrior monarchy, Eleanor's shows her holding an open book, serene, literate and self-possessed. She lies beside Henry, but she isn't visually defined by him. And even in death, Eleanor wasn't beneath Henry. Her tomb effigy appears slightly elevated above his, and whether or not that was the original arrangement, the image is hard to resist. The wife Henry imprisoned for 16 years now lies beside him, not under him, book in hand, sovereign in memory. Eleanor reshaped European political geography. Through her inheritance, she made the Angevin Empire, which dominated 12th century Western Europe and altered Anglo-French relations for centuries. Without Eleanor's Aquitaine, Henry II would not have possessed continental dominance. The political rivalry between Capetian France and Plantagenet England would have taken a different shape. The roots of later Anglo-French conflict, including the 100 Years' War, lie partly in the territorial configuration created by her marriage. She exercised political authority at the highest level as Duchess in her own right, Queen of England, Queen of France, Regent of England, political prisoner and diplomatic envoy. Few medieval women matched the scale and duration of her political activity. Her life demonstrates the structural constraints placed on women and the capacity of some women to maneuver within and sometimes expand those structures. As a queen who accompanied the Second Crusade and later governed during the Third, she stands at the intersection of religious ideology and royal statecraft. And she also embodies the tension we've talked about before when it comes to women's history. The tensions between myth and history, the tendency for women's history to be rewritten after the fact. Eleanor of Aquitaine has always been difficult to separate from the stories told about her. She's been romanticised as a scandalous beauty, blamed as a dangerous wife and mother, celebrated as a proto-feminist, and reinvented in novels and films as a woman ahead of her time. That makes her more than just a remarkable medieval ruler. She's also a case study in how medieval women are remembered, distorted, and repurposed. One of the clearest examples is the tradition surrounding her time on the Second Crusade. Medieval writers accused her of impropriety, luxury, disobedience, and even sexual misconduct. The most notorious rumours linked her romantically with her uncle, Raymond of Poitiers. But there's no real evidence for an affair. We know Eleanor and Louis quarrelled badly at Antioch in 1148, partly over strategy and partly over kinship and authority. Eleanor supported Raymond's plan to focus the crusade on northern Syria, while Louis insisted on continuing to Jerusalem. Chronicles turned that political disagreement into a moral and sexual drama. In other words, a queen who challenged her husband's judgment became, in the narrative tradition, a queen whose body and sexuality had to be explained, suspected, or condemned. The same pattern appears about her alleged courts of love in Poitiers. Later tradition imagined Eleanor presiding over a sophisticated literary court where noble women judged romantic disputes and shaped the ideals of courtly love. This image has been enormously influential, but the historical evidence is shaky at best. Eleanor and her daughter Marie of Champagne were certainly connected to aristocratic literary culture, troubadour poetry, and the language of courtly love. But the idea of formal courts of love, with Eleanor acting almost like a high priestess of romance, owes more to later literary imagination than to solid documentation. But the myth persists because it's attractive. It gives us an Eleanor who is glamorous, artistic, erotic, and intellectually commanding. But it may tell us more about later fantasies of the Middle Ages than about Eleanor's actual household government. Hostile chroniclers also shaped her reputation as a rebellious and dangerous woman. Her support for her son's revolt against Henry was often interpreted along gendered expectations. A king, a prince, or a lord who rebelled would be described as ambitious, wronged, or politically calculating. A wife and mother who rebelled would be portrayed as unnatural. Eleanor's political actions were filtered through anxieties about female authority. She wasn't merely a magnate defending dynastic interests, but a wife who defied her husband and a mother who supposedly corrupted her sons. Modern culture has swung in the opposite direction. Where medieval writers made Eleanor dangerous, modern writers have often made her heroic. She appears as a feminist icon, independent, sexually liberated, intellectually brilliant, unwilling to be controlled by husbands, kings, or popes. There is truth behind the appeal. Eleanor was Duchess of Aquitaine, Queen of France, Queen of England, Mother of Kings, patron of religious houses, and an active political figure well into old age. She negotiated, travelled, ruled, endured imprisonment, and returned to power after prolonged captivity. But calling her a feminist can be anachronistic if it implies modern beliefs about gender equality. Eleanor didn't campaign for women as a class. She defended dynastic power, lineage, inheritance, and aristocratic privilege, including her own. Her life can illuminate women's authority, but it shouldn't be flattened into a modern slogan. Fiction and film add another layer. In The Lion in Winter, Eleanor is brilliant, bitter, seductive, strategic, and emotionally volcanic. It's a fantastic dramatic portrait, and it captures something true about the stakes of Angevin family politics. But it's not documentary evidence. The film's Eleanor is a 20th century creation, witty, psychologically modern, and built for theatrical confrontation. Historical Eleanor probably did possess formidable political intelligence, but we can't recover her private voice in anything like the polished dialogue of modern drama. The danger is that the fictional Eleanor can become more vivid than the archival one. This is why Eleanor is so valuable for historiography. The evidence for her life is both abundant and frustratingly uneven. We know a great deal about where she was, who she married, what lands she held, what charters she witnessed, which rebellions she was linked to, how dynastic politics moved around her, and how she moved through it. But we know far less about her inner life, her motives, her daily relationships, or her exact role in many cultural developments attributed to her. Those gaps invite storytelling. Medieval chroniclers filled those gaps with moral suspicion. Modern audiences often fill them with empowerment narratives. So Eleanor's reputation reveals two problems at once. First, it shows how medieval chroniclers often sexualized or moralized powerful women who stepped outside expected roles. And second, it shows how modern readers can overcorrect by turning those same women into icons of individual freedom. Both approaches can obscure the historical person. A careful reading of Eleanor doesn't require stripping away all drama. Her life really was extraordinary, but it means asking who is telling the story. What do they have to gain for portraying her in this way? Is the claim supported by contemporary evidence? Is a political conflict being rewritten as a sexual scandal? Are modern desires being projected backwards onto a medieval aristocrat? This is what makes Eleanor such a powerful case study. She wasn't only a major political figure of the 12th century, she became a mirror in which different ages saw their own fears and fantasies about women, power, sex, age, motherhood, and rule. Next time we travel to Japan to look at the life of a contemporary of Eleanor's, Tomoe Gozen, a legendary female warrior most famous for her role in the Genpei War, the conflict between the Taira and Minamoto clans that led to the rise of Japan's first shogunate. Join me for that, but for now, thanks very much for being here. Please remember to feed the algorithm by liking, sharing and subscribing. It really does help a small channel like this one. And until next time, whatever you're up to, have a great day.